The wrench slipped from my fingers and clattered against the concrete floor of my garage. Through the open kitchen window, my wife's voice cut through the evening air like a blade. "Dean's just not a man anymore, Lisa. Our neighbor Jason? Now that's what a real man looks like. Jason is more of a man than Dean will ever be." I stood frozen beneath the hood of Mrs. Patterson's old Buick, grease staining my hands, listening to my wife of 15 years casually demolish me to her best friend. The kitchen light cast long shadows across the driveway, and I could see Marla gesturing with her wine glass, probably the third or fourth of the evening. "I mean, look at Jason's success," she continued, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she thought she was being profound. "He built that development company from nothing. He drives a BMW, takes real vacations, wears suits that actually fit. When was the last time Dean took me somewhere nice?" Lisa's laugh was sharp and knowing. "Girl, you deserve so much better. A woman like you, with your law degree, your ambition, you're wasted on a mechanic." My jaw clenched. 32 years I'd been working on engines, building my own shop from a single bay to the 3-bay operation that employed 6 people. But to Marla's new circle of friends, I was just a grease monkey who got his hands dirty for a living. "Jason asked about you again yesterday," Lisa said, lowering her voice just enough to make it sound conspiratorial, but still audible through the window. "He thinks you're amazing, smart, beautiful, accomplished." "He's such a gentleman," Marla sighed, "always asking if I need help with anything around the house. Dean just grunts and reaches for another beer." I wiped my hands on my coveralls and walked closer to the window, staying in the shadows. Through the glass, I could see them sitting at our kitchen table, the same table where we used to plan our future, where our kids had done homework, where we'd shared morning coffee for over a decade. Marla looked different lately. Her hair was styled in some expensive cut, and she was wearing makeup even though she'd supposedly been home all day. The black dress was new too, something I'd never seen before. "You know what the worst part is?" Marla continued, swirling her wine. "I used to think Dean was strong. When we first met, he seemed so capable, so sure of himself. Now he just seems small, especially compared to Jason." "Jason's got that confidence that comes from real success," Lisa agreed. "He owns half the new construction in town. Dean fixes other people's broken cars." "Exactly. Jason builds things. Dean just patches up what's already falling apart." The comparison stung because it wasn't entirely unfair. Jason Red had moved in next door 3 years ago, fresh from some big city deal that let him buy the biggest house on the block. He drove luxury cars, wore expensive clothes, and threw parties where everyone seemed to hang on his every word. I'd tried to be neighborly at first, introduced myself, offered to help when he was moving in, but Jason had this way of looking at me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. The polite smile that never reached his eyes, the firm handshake that lasted just a second too long, the casual comments about working with your hands that somehow made it sound like a character flaw. "I should probably head home," Lisa said, and I heard chairs scraping against the kitchen floor. "Think about what I said, Marla. You don't have to settle for less than you deserve." "I know," Marla replied softly. "I've been thinking about it a lot lately." The front door opened and closed, and I heard Marla's footsteps heading upstairs. I stood in my garage, surrounded by the tools and equipment that had built our life together, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. More of a man than I'll ever be. The words echoed in my head as I mechanically cleaned my tools and locked up the shop. Jason's house loomed next door, every window blazing with expensive light fixtures, his BMW gleaming in the driveway like a monument to his superiority. I walked through our modest home, noting details I'd somehow missed before. The way Marla had redecorated the living room without asking my opinion, the new clothes in her closet, tags removed but creases still sharp from the store, the credit card statements I wasn't supposed to see, showing charges at restaurants I'd never been to, at times when she'd claimed to be working late. Our bedroom felt like foreign territory. Marla was already asleep, or pretending to be, turned away from my side of the bed. I stood in the doorway, looking at the woman I'd married, the mother of our 2 children, and realized I was looking at a stranger, more of a man than I'll ever be. I pulled a duffel bag from the closet and began packing. Not everything, just enough. Work clothes, personal items, the things that mattered. Marla didn't stir as I moved quietly around the room, gathering pieces of my life. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Jason's pool filter running next door. Even his mechanical systems sounded more expensive than mine. I left my wedding ring on the dresser next to a note that simply read, "You're right, Jason is more of a man. Good luck with that." By dawn, I was gone. The extended stay motel on Highway 9 wasn't exactly luxury living, but it was clean, quiet, and most importantly, it was mine. For the first time in months, I could think clearly without Marla's constant commentary about my shortcomings or the sound of Jason's laughter drifting over the fence. I'd been there 3 days when my phone started buzzing with messages. "Dean, what the hell? Come home so we can talk about this like adults." "You're being ridiculous. I was just venting to Lisa." "The kids are asking where you are. What am I supposed to tell them?" I ignored them all. Instead, I focused on work, putting in 12-hour days at the shop and using the extra time to catch up on paperwork I'd been neglecting. My employees, Mike, Carlos, and Jenny, didn't ask questions, but I could see the curiosity in their eyes. "Boss seems different," I overheard Jenny telling Mike during lunch break. "Focused, like he's got something to prove." She wasn't wrong. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a clear purpose. The shop was mine, built with my own hands and knowledge. Every repair, every satisfied customer, every dollar earned was proof that I wasn't the failure Marla made me out to be. On Friday evening, I was finishing up a brake job on a Ford pickup when my daughter Emma appeared in the doorway of the shop. 17 years old, with Marla's dark hair and my stubborn chin, she stood there in her school clothes, looking uncertain. "Hi, Dad." "Hey, sweetheart." I wiped my hands and gave her my full attention. "How did you find me?" "Mike told me you've been staying at the motel." She looked around the shop, taking in the organized chaos of tools and parts. "Mom's been crying a lot." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you coming home?" The question hung in the air between us. Emma was smart, old enough to understand that marriages sometimes fell apart, but young enough to hope that parents could fix anything if they really wanted to. "I don't know, Em. Your mom and I have some things to work through." "Is it because of Mr. Red?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" Emma shifted uncomfortably. "He's been coming over a lot since you left, helping Mom with stuff around the house. Tommy thinks it's weird." Tommy was our 14-year-old son, and if he thought something was weird, it probably was. The kid had radar for adult nonsense. "What kind of help?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I don't know, fixing the garbage disposal, moving furniture, stuff like that. Mom says he's just being a good neighbor." I nodded, but something cold was settling in my stomach. Jason had never shown any interest in being helpful before. In 3 years of living next door, he'd never so much as offered to lend a cup of sugar. "Dad, are you and Mom getting divorced?" The fear in Emma's voice almost broke my resolve. This was the hardest part, knowing that whatever happened between Marla and me would inevitably hurt our kids. "I hope not, sweetheart. But sometimes adults need space to figure things out." She hugged me then, fierce and quick, before heading back to her car. I watched her drive away, noting that she was using Marla's Honda instead of the beat-up Civic we'd bought her for her birthday. Another small change in the landscape of our family. That night, I drove past the house for the first time since I'd left. It was almost 10 o'clock, but the lights were still on in the kitchen. Through the window, I could see 2 figures sitting at the table, wine glasses between them, Marla and Jason. They were leaning toward each other in a way that suggested intimacy, familiarity. Jason's hand was resting on the table near hers, close enough to touch. As I watched, Marla laughed at something he said, throwing her head back in a gesture I remembered from our early dating days. I sat in my truck across the street, engine running, and felt the last pieces of my old life crumble away. This wasn't a recent development. The easy way they sat together, the comfortable body language, the fact that Jason was in my house at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, this had been building for a while. More of a man than I'll ever be. Now I understood what she'd really been saying. She'd already found her upgrade. The next morning, I made a decision that would have horrified the old dean, the one who trusted blindly and never asked uncomfortable questions. I was going to find out exactly what had been happening in my absence, and more importantly, what had been happening before I left. I started with the obvious stuff. Bank statements, credit card records, phone bills, all the digital breadcrumbs that modern life leaves behind. Marla had always handled most of our finances, claiming she was better with numbers, and I'd been happy to let her manage the details. That trust now seemed incredibly naive. The credit card statements told an interesting story. Charges at expensive restaurants on days when Marla claimed to be working late. A hotel bill from 2 months ago, when she'd supposedly been at a legal conference in the state capital. Except the hotel wasn't anywhere near the conference center. It was a boutique place downtown, the kind couples used for romantic getaways. The phone records were even more revealing. Hundreds of texts to Jason's number starting about 6 months ago. The frequency had increased dramatically in recent weeks, with some days showing dozens of exchanges. I couldn't see the content of the messages, but the timing painted a clear picture. Late-night conversations, exchanges during work hours, patterns that lined up perfectly with Marla's increasingly frequent absences and mood changes. But the real revelation came when I decided to take a closer look at our joint savings account. We'd been building it steadily for years, planning for Emma's college expenses and maybe a nicer house eventually. The balance should have been around $38,000. It was down to $12,000. $26,000 had been withdrawn over the past 4 months, in increments small enough not to trigger any automatic alerts. The withdrawals were all made with Marla's debit card, on days when I'd been working at the shop. I sat in my motel room, surrounded by printouts and statements, trying to process the scope of what I was looking at. This wasn't just an affair. It was a systematic dismantling of everything we'd built together. My phone buzzed with another text from Marla. "Dean, please come home. We need to talk." For the first time since I'd left, I replied, "We'll talk when you're ready to tell me about the $26,000. The response came back immediately. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer, let her sweat. The next few days passed in a strange kind of limbo. I went to work, came back to the motel, and continued my investigation. I drove past the house occasionally, noting Jason's BMW in our driveway with increasing frequency. Sometimes it was there when I left for work in the morning, suggesting he'd spent the night. The kids called regularly, but the conversations were strained. They could sense something major was happening, but they didn't have enough information to understand what. Emma seemed caught between loyalty to her mother and concern for me. Tommy was just angry, the way 14-year-old boys get angry when their world becomes unpredictable. "When are you coming home, Dad?" he asked during one particularly difficult call. "I don't know, son. Your mother and I are working through some problems." "Is it because she's always hanging out with Mr. Red now?" Even Tommy had noticed. The situation was apparently obvious to everyone except the husband who'd been too busy working to pay attention. "It's complicated, Tommy." Adults always say that when they don't want to tell you the truth. He wasn't wrong. A week into my exile, I was closing up the shop when Mike approached me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Boss, you got a minute?" Mike had been with me for 8 years, starting as an apprentice and working his way up to my most trusted mechanic. He was also one of the few people who knew me well enough to speak freely. "What's on your mind?" It's probably not my place to say anything, but he paused, clearly uncomfortable. "My girlfriend lives over on Maple Street, a couple blocks from your house. She's been seeing your wife around town with that neighbor of yours. At restaurants, the movies, holding hands in the park." The confirmation of what I already suspected still hit like a punch to the gut. "How long?" I asked. "At least a couple months, maybe longer. Sarah didn't want to say anything because she wasn't sure if you knew, if maybe you and your wife had some kind of arrangement or something." "No arrangement," Mike nodded grimly. "I figured. Just thought you should know that people are talking." People are talking. In a town of 15,000, that was almost worse than the affair itself. I wasn't just being betrayed, I was being publicly humiliated. That night, I made a decision that surprised me with its clarity. I wasn't going to slink away quietly and let Marla rewrite history. I wasn't going to be the pathetic husband who got discarded for a better model. I was going to fight back. The law office of Patricia Hendricks occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house downtown, the kind of place that suggested competence without flashiness. Patricia was known for handling messy divorces with surgical precision, and her reputation for protecting her clients' interests was legendary. She was also Marla's former boss, which made the meeting deliciously ironic. "Dean Calix," she said, shaking my hand with a grip that could crack walnuts. "I heard you might be needing my services." Patricia was in her 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd built her practice by being smarter and more prepared than everyone else in the room, and her track record spoke for itself. "Word travels fast," I said. "Small town. Plus, Marla worked for me for 2 years before she went to Brennan and Associates. I know her tendencies." We sat in her office, surrounded by law books and case files, while I laid out everything I'd discovered. The financial records, the timeline of the affair, the systematic depletion of our savings account. Patricia listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me with professional interest. "How do you want to handle this?" "I want to protect my assets, maintain access to my kids, and make sure Marla doesn't get to play the victim in this scenario." "The victim angle is always tricky," Patricia warned. "Cheating spouses often try to flip the narrative, claim they were driven to infidelity by neglect or emotional abuse. Marla's smart enough to try that approach." "Let her try. I've got documentation going back months. Bank records, credit card statements, phone logs. Plus, half the town has seen her parading around with Jason." "Good. Documentation is everything in cases like this. Patricia made another note. What about the missing money? I want it back, with interest. We'll demand full financial disclosure as part of the proceedings. If she can't account for $26,000 in marital assets, the court won't look kindly on that. We spent the next hour going over strategy. Patricia would file the initial paperwork, requesting temporary orders for asset protection and custody arrangements. More importantly, she would make it clear that I wasn't going to be steamrolled. One more thing, I said as we wrapped up. I want to know everything about Jason Redd's finances. If Marla's been funding his lifestyle with our money, I want proof. Patricia smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. Now you're thinking like someone who wants to win. I left her office feeling more confident than I had in weeks. For too long, I'd been reacting to events instead of controlling them. That was about to change. My next stop was the bank, where I opened a new account and had my paychecks redirected. If Marla wanted to play financial games, she'd have to do it without access to my income. Then I visited a private investigator named Ray Morrison, a former police detective who specialized in marital cases. Ray was expensive, but his reputation for thoroughness was worth the cost. I need everything you can find on Jason Redd, I told him. Financial records, business dealings, personal history, and I need photographic evidence of his relationship with my wife. Ray nodded. How detailed do you want the surveillance? Detailed enough to remove any doubt about what's been happening. That'll take about 2 weeks, maybe 3. My rate is $500 a day plus expenses. It was a lot of money, but I had a feeling it would be worth every penny. While Ray worked his magic, I focused on rebuilding my own life. I found a furnished apartment closer to the shop, something temporary but more livable than the motel. I bought new clothes, got a haircut, and started working out at the gym again. The physical activity felt good, like I was shedding the weight of years of complacency. Every morning, I pushed myself harder, building strength and endurance I hadn't needed when I was just trying to keep the peace at home. Emma and Tommy visited the new apartment, and I could see them processing the change in their father. I wasn't the defeated man who'd slunk away in the night. I was someone with a plan, someone who decided to fight for what mattered. Dad, you look different, Emma observed during one of our dinners together. Different how? I don't know. Stronger, I guess. More like yourself. It was an interesting way to put it, but she wasn't wrong. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living my own life instead of trying to meet someone else's expectations. The kids told me about life at home, carefully avoiding direct criticism of their mother, but painting a picture I could easily interpret. Jason was there constantly now, acting like he belonged. He'd moved some of his things into the house, was giving opinions about household decisions, treating my children like they were his responsibility. He told me I should consider trade school instead of college, Tommy reported with obvious irritation, said working with your hands was more honest than pushing papers around. The irony was thick. Jason, who'd made his fortune in real estate development and had never worked a manual job in his life, was dispensing wisdom about honest work to my son. What did you tell him? I told him he wasn't my dad and he should mind his own business. Good man. 2 weeks after hiring Ray, I got the call I'd been waiting for. We need to meet, he said. I've got everything you wanted, and then some. Ray's office was a cramped space above a bail bondsman, furnished with mismatched furniture and the accumulated detritus of 20 years in the investigation business. But his work was meticulous, organized in neat folders with labeled tabs and chronological summaries. Your wife's boyfriend is interesting, Ray said, spreading photographs across his desk. Very interesting. The photos told the story I'd expected, but seeing it documented was still jarring. Marla and Jason at restaurants, holding hands across candlelit tables. Marla leaving Jason's house early in the morning, wearing the same clothes from the night before. Jason's BMW parked in my driveway at all hours. But Ray had dug deeper than just the affair. Jason Redd isn't quite the success story he pretends to be, Ray continued, opening a thick folder. His development company is leveraged to the hilt, and he's been juggling creditors for the past 6 months. The BMW, leased. The house, second mortgage for more than it's worth. He handed me a financial summary that painted a picture of a man living far beyond his means. Gets better, Ray said. I tracked down his ex-wife in Denver. Turns out Jason has a pattern. He targets married women with assets, romances them away from their husbands, then bleeds them dry before moving on to the next mark. How many times? This would be number 4 that I can document. The ex-wife was very chatty once she understood what I was investigating. She lost her house, her savings, and custody of her kids before she figured out what Jason was really after. The scope of it was staggering. Jason wasn't just a neighbor who'd developed feelings for my wife. He was a predator who'd identified her as a target. There's more, Ray said, producing another set of documents. Remember that $26,000 that went missing from your account? I tracked where it went. He showed me bank records that traced the money through a series of transfers, ultimately ending up in accounts controlled by Jason's company. My wife had been systematically looting our savings to fund her boyfriend's failing business. This is fraud, I said, studying the paper trail. Technically, yes, but proving criminal intent would be tricky since Marla had legal access to the account. However, in a divorce proceeding, this kind of asset dissipation is a big problem for her. I gathered up the photographs and documents, feeling a mixture of vindication and disgust. The evidence was overwhelming, but it also meant that my marriage hadn't just died. It had been murdered by a con artist and his willing accomplice. One more thing, Ray said as I prepared to leave. I've been watching Jason's house for 2 weeks. Your wife isn't his only visitor. There's another woman, comes by on weekends when your wife isn't there. Blonde, drives a red Lexus. He handed me a final photograph showing Jason embracing a woman I didn't recognize. He's playing multiple angles, Ray explained. Your wife probably thinks she's his only romantic interest, but Jason's got backup plans. The drive back to my apartment gave me time to process everything Ray had uncovered. The betrayal was worse than I'd imagined, but so was my position for fighting back. Marla and Jason had underestimated me, assumed I'd accept their narrative and fade away quietly. They were about to learn otherwise. That evening, I called Patricia and arranged an emergency meeting. She reviewed Ray's evidence with professional satisfaction, making notes and organizing the materials into a coherent strategy. This changes everything, she said. With this level of documentation, Marla's going to have a very hard time claiming any kind of moral high ground. What's our next move? We file for divorce and request an emergency hearing for asset protection. With evidence of dissipation, the court will likely freeze all remaining marital assets and require Marla to account for every penny she spent. And Jason? We can't touch him directly in the divorce proceedings, but we can certainly make his role clear. Plus, if his business is as shaky as these documents suggest, the publicity from a messy divorce case might be enough to push him over the edge. Patricia's smile was predatory. I'm going to enjoy this case. 2 days later, Marla was served with divorce papers at her office. According to Patricia's contact at the courthouse, my wife's reaction was explosive. Tears, shouting, and threats to fight for everything she could get. But the real fireworks started when she realized I'd frozen our joint accounts and cut off her access to my income. Within hours, my phone was buzzing with increasingly frantic calls. Dean, what the hell do you think you're doing? Protecting my assets from further theft. Theft? I'm your wife. I have every right to that money. Had. Past tense. And actually, you don't have the right to steal $26,000 to fund your boyfriend's failing business. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute. I don't know what you're talking about, she finally said, but her voice had lost its indignant edge. Bank records don't lie, Marla. Neither do photographs, credit card statements, or private investigators. Another long pause. We should talk in person, she said. Work this out like adults. We'll work it out in court. Have your lawyer call Patricia Hendricks. I hung up and turned off my phone. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I was in control of the situation. The next few days brought a flurry of legal activity. Marla hired an attorney, not her current boss, but a specialist in contentious divorces. The temporary orders hearing was scheduled for the following week. But the most interesting development came from an unexpected source. Emma called me on Thursday evening, her voice tight with anger. Dad, I need to tell you something about Mr. Red. Emma's voice carried a maturity that reminded me she was almost 18, old enough to understand adult complications, but still young enough to be shocked by them. He made a pass at me, she said without preamble. The words hit me like a physical blow. I was sitting in my apartment, eating a microwave dinner, and suddenly the food turned to ash in my mouth. What exactly happened? Yesterday after school, Mom was at work, and I came home to get some books I'd forgotten. Jason was there, said he was fixing the kitchen sink. He offered me a drink, started asking about my plans after graduation, whether I had a boyfriend. Emma paused, and I could hear her taking a shaky breath. Then he said I was growing up to be as beautiful as Mom, and he put his hand on my shoulder. When I tried to move away, he grabbed my wrist and said maybe we could spend some time together, just the two of us. He said it could be our secret. Rage flooded through me, white-hot and consuming. The predator wasn't content with destroying my marriage. He was targeting my daughter. Did you tell your mother? I tried. She said I was being dramatic, that Jason was just being friendly. She actually got mad at me for misinterpreting his kindness. Of course she did. Marla was so invested in her fantasy that she couldn't acknowledge the truth about her boyfriend, even when it threatened her own daughter. Emma, I want you to stay away from him. If he's in the house when you get home from school, don't go in. Call me instead. Dad, there's something else. I think he's been going through your stuff. What do you mean? Your office in the basement. I saw him coming up from down there yesterday, and when I went to check later, things were moved around, like someone had been looking through your files. Jason was searching for leverage, probably hoping to find something he could use against me in the divorce. The violation felt personal in a way that even the affair hadn't. Listen to me carefully, I told Emma. I want you and Tommy to pack bags and stay with your Aunt Linda for a few days. Tell your mother you're helping with your cousin's birthday party. Is everything going to be okay? It's going to be better than okay, I promise. After Emma hung up, I sat in my apartment and let the anger burn through me. Jason had crossed a line that transformed this from a marital dispute into something much more serious. He'd threatened my child, invaded my home, and apparently believed he was untouchable. He was about to learn otherwise. I called Patricia first, reporting Jason's inappropriate behavior toward Emma. She made careful notes and explained how this information could be used in the custody proceedings. This paints Jason as a potential threat to the children, she said. Combined with everything else we have, it's going to be very hard for Marla to argue that her relationship with him is in the kids' best interests. My next call was to Ray Morrison. I need you to dig deeper into Jason's background, I told him. Specifically, I want to know if he has any history of inappropriate behavior with minors. That's a serious allegation. It's a serious situation. My daughter isn't safe in my own house because of this man. I'll make some calls. Give me 48 hours. The temporary orders hearing was scheduled for Monday morning. Over the weekend, I prepared for battle, reviewing all the evidence Ray had gathered and mentally rehearsing the key points. I wanted to make sure Patricia covered. But Sunday evening brought an unexpected development. Marla called from a number I didn't recognize, her voice shaking with what sounded like genuine fear. Dean, I think I made a mistake. Just one? I'm serious. Something's wrong with Jason. He's been asking me to sign papers, transfer more money, put his name on the house deed. When I hesitated, he got angry, really angry. I waited, letting her continue. He said things, threatening things, about what would happen if I didn't cooperate, and Emma told me what he said to her. I didn't believe her at first, but now you're realizing you brought a predator into our home. I think he's been using me. All of this, the whole relationship, I think it was just about money. The admission should have felt like vindication, but mostly it just made me tired. Too little, too late. Where are you calling from? A hotel. I couldn't stay in the house with him there. He has a key, and he acts like he owns the place. Good. Stay away from him. Dean, I know I don't have any right to ask, but I'm scared. I think he might do something crazy when he realizes I'm not going to give him what he wants. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the $26,000, the months of lies, the casual cruelty of her words that night in the kitchen. You made your choice, Marla. Now you get to live with the consequences. Please, I know you hate me, but I need help. No, you need a lawyer and a restraining order. Figure it out. I hung up and turned off the phone. Whatever happened next between Marla and Jason was no longer my problem, but I was wrong about that. Monday morning's hearing was a masterpiece of legal precision. Patricia presented our evidence methodically, building a case that painted Marla not as a wayward spouse seeking happiness, but as a co-conspirator in a systematic fraud. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Margaret Walsh, reviewed the financial documents with obvious displeasure. When Patricia showed the paper trail of the missing $26,000, Judge Walsh's expression grew thunderous. Marla's attorney, a nervous young man named Bradley Chen, tried to argue that his client had been manipulated by Jason, that she was more victim than perpetrator. But the evidence was overwhelming, and his attempts at damage control fell flat. Mrs. Calix, Judge Walsh said, addressing Marla directly, can you explain why you transferred $26,000 in marital assets to accounts controlled by Mr. Red without your husband's knowledge or consent? Marla, looking haggard and frightened, stammered through an explanation about Jason needing temporary help with cash flow, claiming she'd believed the money would be repaid quickly. And where is Mr. Red now? The judge asked. I don't know, Your Honor. Patricia leaned forward. Your Honor, our investigation suggests that Mr. Red has left the state. His house is empty, his office is closed, and his phone number is disconnected. The courtroom fell silent. Even Bradley Chen looked surprised by this development. Judge Walsh's ruling was swift and decisive. All remaining marital assets were frozen, with me maintaining control of my business and income. Marla was ordered to provide a complete accounting of all expenditures over the past 6 months and to make restitution for any funds that couldn't be recovered. Most importantly, I was granted temporary custody of Emma and Tommy, with Marla receiving supervised visitation until the final divorce decree. As we left the courthouse, Patricia was practically glowing with satisfaction. "That was even better than I expected," she said. "Judge Walsh clearly views your wife as either a criminal or a fool, and either way, it's not good for her case." But my sense of victory was short-lived. As I drove back to the shop, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. "Dean Calix?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional. "Yes." "This is Detective Sarah Martinez with the State Police. I understand you've been investigating Jason Redd's activities." "Through a private investigator, yes. Why?" "We need to talk. Mr. Redd's body was found this morning in a motel room about 50 miles north of town, and your wife was the last person seen with him." The world tilted sideways. I pulled over to the side of the road, trying to process what I'd just heard. "Are you saying Marla is a suspect?" "I'm saying we need to talk to everyone who had recent contact with Mr. Redd. Can you come to the station this afternoon?" I spent the next 3 hours in a sterile interview room, going over everything I knew about Jason's relationship with my wife and his financial situation. Detective Martinez was thorough, but not accusatory, clearly trying to piece together the timeline of Jason's final days. "Your wife claims she went to confront Mr. Redd about the money he'd taken," Martinez explained. "She says she found him packing to leave town and demanded he return what he'd stolen. According to her statement, he became violent, and she left in fear for her safety." "And then what happened?" "That's what we're trying to figure out. The motel clerk says Jason was alive when your wife left around 8 p.m. His body was discovered at noon the next day." "How did he pass?" Detective Martinez studied me carefully. "Apparent heart attack. No signs of violence, no obvious cause for suspicion. But given the circumstances, the fraud, the timing, the fact that he was preparing to flee, we have to investigate thoroughly." I provided everything I could: Ray's investigation files, the financial records, the timeline of the affair. Martinez took careful notes and promised to keep me informed of any developments. But as I left the police station, one thought kept circling through my mind. Jason Redd was gone, taking with him any chance of recovering the stolen money and leaving Marla to face the consequences alone. It should have felt like justice. Instead, it just felt empty. That evening, Emma and Tommy came to stay at my apartment. They'd heard about Jason through the school gossip network, and they were full of questions I couldn't answer. "Is Mom going to go to prison?" Tommy asked with the bluntness of adolescence. "I don't know, son. The police are still investigating." "Good," Emma said quietly. "After what he did to our family, what he tried to do to me, I'm not sorry he's gone." Her words were harsh, but I understood the sentiment. Jason had been a cancer in our lives, destroying everything he touched. His absence felt like the lifting of a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Over the next few days, more details emerged. Jason had indeed been preparing to leave town, his car packed with suitcases and boxes. The motel room was registered under a false name, paid for with cash. Most tellingly, there was evidence that he'd been trying to liquidate assets quickly, converting everything he could into untraceable funds. The medical examiner confirmed that Jason had experienced a massive heart attack, likely brought on by stress and cocaine use. There were no signs of foul play, no evidence that anyone else had been involved in his demise. Marla was cleared of any criminal wrongdoing, but her reputation in town was destroyed. The details of the affair, the fraud, and Jason's true nature had become public knowledge, spread through the gossip networks that kept small towns informed and entertained. She moved in with her sister in another state, leaving behind the house, the community, and the life she'd tried to build with stolen money and borrowed time. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. I kept the house, the shop, and primary custody of the kids. Marla was ordered to pay restitution for the missing funds, though everyone knew the money was gone forever, probably sitting in offshore accounts that would never be traced. 3 months after Jason Redd was found in that motel room, I was working late in my shop when I heard a car pull into the parking lot. Through the window, I saw a familiar figure approaching the door. Marla looked older, worn down by the weight of consequences she'd never anticipated. Her expensive clothes had been replaced by simple jeans and a sweater, and the confidence that had once defined her was nowhere to be seen. "Hello, Dean." I set down my wrench and wiped my hands, studying the woman who had once been my wife. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the collapse of her carefully constructed new life. "What do you want, Marla?" "I wanted to apologize. For everything. I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed to say it." "Okay, you've said it." She looked around the shop, taking in the organized chaos that had always been my domain. You were right about him, about Jason. He was using me from the beginning. I know. The police found evidence that he'd done this before. To other women, I was just another mark. I waited, letting her continue. I lost everything, Dean. My job, my reputation, my children's respect. The house is being foreclosed on because I can't make the payments without access to our accounts. I'm living with my sister, working as a paralegal for barely above minimum wage. That's unfortunate. I know you hate me. I know I deserve it. But I was hoping the kids need their mother. The kids have their mother. They visit you every other weekend, just like the court ordered. It's not enough. I barely know them anymore. Emma graduates next month, and I'm not even invited to the ceremony. That was Emma's choice, not mine. Marla's composure cracked, and tears began flowing down her cheeks. I destroyed everything good in my life for a man who saw me as nothing more than a bank account with benefits. How do I live with that? For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the months of lies, the casual cruelty, the $26,000 that would never be recovered. You live with it the same way I lived with being told that our neighbor was more of a man than I'd ever be. You get up every morning and you deal with the consequences of your choices. Dean, please. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but you're right. You don't. The words hung in the air between us, final and unforgiving. Marla wiped her eyes and nodded, understanding that there would be no reconciliation, no second chances. I should go. Yes, you should. She paused at the door, looking back one last time. For what it's worth, you were always more of a man than Jason ever was. I was just too stupid to see it. After she left, I stood in my shop surrounded by the tools and equipment that had built my life, thinking about the strange turns that fate can take. Jason Red had entered our lives like a storm, destroying everything in his path before ultimately destroying himself. Marla had gambled everything on a fantasy and lost it all, and I had emerged from the wreckage stronger and more focused than I'd been in years. The next morning brought news that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. A detective from Denver called to inform me that Jason's estate was being liquidated to pay restitution to his various victims. As the most recent and best documented case, I was likely to recover a significant portion of the stolen money. How much? I asked. Probably around $20,000, maybe more. Mr. Red kept better records than most criminals. He actually documented his thefts quite thoroughly. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to restore most of what had been taken. That afternoon, Emma stopped by the shop to tell me about her college acceptance letters. She'd been accepted to 3 universities, including her first choice for engineering. I want to be like you, Dad, she said. Someone who builds things instead of just tearing them down. Tommy, now 15 and growing into the kind of young man I was proud to call my son, had started working at the shop on weekends. He had good hands and a natural understanding of how mechanical systems worked. Maybe I'll take over the business someday, he said one Saturday as we worked together on a transmission rebuild. Maybe you will. The house felt different now, lighter somehow. The kids and I had developed new routines, new traditions. We ate dinner together every night, talked about our days, made plans for the future. Sometimes Emma would mention her mother, usually with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. Tommy rarely spoke about Marla at all, as if she'd become irrelevant to his daily life. Do you think she'll ever get her life back together? Emma asked one evening. I don't know, sweetheart. That's up to her. Do you ever miss her? It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself for months. Did I miss the woman I'd married, the mother of my children, the person I'd planned to spend my life with? I miss who she used to be, I said finally. But that person was gone long before I moved out. 6 months later, I was closing up the shop when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was short and to the point. Dean, Jason emptied my bank account and disappeared. I think he's been planning this for months. I know you probably don't care, but I thought you should know you were right about everything. I'm sorry. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Marla's problems were no longer my concern. Outside, the evening air was crisp with the promise of autumn. I locked up the shop and walked to my truck, thinking about the dinner Emma was making and the homework I'd promised to help Tommy with. Jason Red had been more of a man than I'd ever be, according to my ex-wife. But real men didn't abandon their families, steal from their neighbors, or prey on teenage girls. Real men built things that lasted, protected the people they loved, and faced the consequences of their actions. I drove home to my children, to the life I'd rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete satisfaction with the man I'd become. The neighbor who was supposedly more of a man was gone, leaving nothing behind but wreckage and regret. And I was still here, still building, still